Understanding their own strengths and weaknesses can be really impactful for other team members and the team itself. And being able to draw on those strengths, both on and off the pitch, can really build a great squad mentality.
Hello and welcome to Coaching Cards. I'm Katie and I'm joined by Abs and Joe, where we'll be discussing self-awareness and self-motivation for players. I'm going to kick it off with the first card. Abs, how important is it to develop self-aware players?
Yeah, I think it's really important across all of the stages. I think it's really important for you to develop players that have the ability to be able to make their own decisions, which also increases player engagement as well.
Very important to develop self-aware players, but also to develop self-aware people. So person before player, I think, is important. And getting them to understand and be able to work out who they are, the way they feel, the way they think, and the beliefs that they have. That then lends itself to a more rounded individual.
And I guess it will help them reach their full potential, won't it? If they're able to understand kind of where they are, where they want to go, if they have that awareness of kind of what might challenge them, what might help them to develop, then obviously we can really support them on their playing journey.
What is it that we need players to have awareness of?
Aware of their own feelings, their own thoughts, why they're feeling the way they are at any given time. So my recommendation for players is to check in with themselves regularly. And once they're able to understand themselves, then they've got the opportunity to be aware and start to understand other people.
I think that's really important as well, because we need to understand how they will have an impact on other people around them. So, it's not just themselves. You might be working with, under 9s and there's 10 players, so, the other 9 have an impact on, or you might be working in senior football where you might have a squad of 18. So the impact that you as a player has on the other 17 around you, the coaching staff, the wider MDT is really, really important as well.
The awareness of just what's around them as well, like on a match day, the opposition, but just also how to potentially deal with the adversity or things that might not go, will go against them. So just having that, maybe that holistic awareness approach of it all.
How could coaches help players think about how they behave and perform?
I think that's a really interesting one, and I think it can sometimes be hard, especially when you're working with young players as well. Consistent messages with them, consistent language, I think that's really, really important to, help players understand who they are, their behaviours, how their behaviours impact themselves, how they impact other people. I think it's a really, really important one, and I think if we start to allow players to have some freedom to kind of explore those emotions and how they feel as they go through the pathway into, YDP, PDP and senior football, there'll be a more rounded, not just player, as you said, but a more rounded individual, more well-rounded person.
It's supporting the player as a person as well.
But that awareness of how your behaviours impact on your performance. Similarly then you can reflect on how other players' behaviours has impacted on your performance, and therefore you've got that circle to be rounded. And we're looking for players who can be cohesive, work within a team, but understand how their behaviours can impact on that team.
Do you have any advice to help players recognise how they can best use their on and off-field attributes to help themselves and others?
What motivates you? What motivates others? Understanding, about your teammates, a bit of that sort of four-corner model as well, that social engagement as well, and I think that really helps with that development as well.
Understanding their own strengths and weaknesses can be really impactful for other team members and the team itself. And being able to draw on those strengths, both on and off the pitch, can really build a great squad mentality.
I think it's really key there to have coaches who are able to develop really good observation skills themselves. So if the players can't yet notice what their strengths are and where their development points are, how can we as coaches observe and actually see? We might have a player that's, the perfect level of calmness that we need when the game gets a bit chaotic, and we might have a player that's really good to regulate their emotions, and can they be a calming influence on some of the players on the pitch who maybe their feelings get really chaotic and they get a little bit fiery on the pitch? How can we use some of those players to maybe help self-regulate players around them? When you're working, with players 2-3 times a week, when they really get to know each other, you will have a really good, hopefully good understanding of where each player sits on the four-corner model, as you've said, Abs, and where their strengths lie. Are they a really calming influence? Are they one that's a bit more fiery and probably needs the calming influence around them to help support them, to help them actually reach that potential?
I think also, Katie, with that, it's as well as on the pitch, they can have a big impact off the pitch. and setting particular standards, whether it's with dress code, whether it's with attendance, whether it's timekeeping. Somebody who can set those standards really does help, I think, raise the standards of the group generally.
How much of an impact does it have on motivation if coaches understand their players and what their world looks like?
I think that's a huge impact, to have that understanding, that empathy of where somebody comes from. If a coach can show that and communicate that to a player, then the player himself will become more highly motivated, I think, to learn and accept the challenges that have been put down by the coach within training sessions.
Yeah. As you already said, Joe, like the impact of us as coaches seeing them as people first and players second, it's how can you get to know your players on like a personal basis first. So even just silly things like, you know, how many brothers and sisters do they have, what football team do they support, who's their role model. As you start to find out those little things about them, you build that relationship. And I've definitely found in my own coaching journey, when you build those relationships with players, they're more likely to be motivated and want to play not just for themselves but for you as the coach as well, and for the other players around them, because you've kind of built a safe space for them where they feel really, really important. And I think that is so, so critical.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you, and I think it's also important that we understand what makes them tick as well, like getting to know about their siblings and family, but also what motivates them. What's their personal drive. And I think, you know, if I was coaching you two, I wouldn't be dealing with you, Katie, the same way I might deal with you. So it's how you actually interact with your players individually as well, but be consistent with it as well, to understand where they're coming from. And you might have players travelling over an hour and a half on public transport. Do you question why they're late? Are they consistent? So it's their world and how you can support them in that as well.
Katie, to ensure players are motivated, how important is it to offer an environment that appropriately challenges them, and how can they do that?
I find it really important as well to give players some ownership. Obviously, how much ownership you give them might dial up or dial down depending on if you're working with, you know, under 7s or if you're working with under 18s. That will look slightly different. When you give players a little bit more ownership, I think you start to get a little bit back from them in terms of that extra motivation. I think it needs to be fun. It needs to be a fun, safe environment. And for me, when you create that as a player, as a coach, you thrive. I always say as a coach, you need to not be too high and never be too low. So how can you be really kind of steady with, as we've said, those consistent behaviours? Because then that does breed off into your players, and it ensures that they're staying consistent with their behaviours and their self-regulation too. And
if players know that they're coming to training and they're looking forward to it because it's fun, it's engaging, there's a social element to it, they're going to be motivated to come. But you're also trying to set standards within it. If it's a small-sided game, little constraints and added bonuses and things like that. So it's always good.
Back to the point about understanding the players and, you know, why are they there? What's their motivation for being there? And in a professional club environment, they're there because they want to be professional players, and therefore we have to challenge them in order to improve. And as coaches, it's our job to understand what is the right challenge and what is the right support at the right time. So getting that balance is for high challenge, and the amount of support that goes with that is a real, I think, skill for the coach to develop himself and understand what each player needs within each training session.
And I think as a coach, we probably don't always get it right when we're finding out the players and learning about them, but I think the more time we dedicate to that, the better we will become as coaches, and then the better our support will be for those players. You know, working in senior women's football, I've got players that are 16 all the way to players that are 34. So, you know, we joke with some of the players, like some of you could be the other players' mums, and it's you know, how do you get the balance and that support with players that are really at the start of their kind of senior journey compared to those that are coming towards the end and probably thinking about retirement, hanging up their boots. And as we've said, like what a 16-year-old will need in that senior environment will be so different to what a 34-year-old will need. I think, you know, if we can, you know, put in some healthy challenge for young players to see them kind of excel and kind of cement themselves into the senior environment, but still continuing to challenge those older players who are more experienced within the senior game, and still giving them the challenge, even if they see it as probably their last 1 or 2 years of playing.
Yeah, just on that again, it's all about the intrinsic motivation. At the start of the season, you want to ask players what they want to achieve during the season. It might be short-term goals, long-term goals and medium-term. So it's understanding where they are, what they want to achieve, and how you as a coach can support them
I love the challenge of these 16-year-olds playing against the 34-year-olds and the challenges that throws down for you as a coach. We've talked about the training sessions, but the games programme also becomes a challenge. When does that 16-year-old need to step into that more senior environment? And when do you need to bring that 16-year-old back? So that it doesn't become too stressful or overbearing. But at the same time, they feel as though they're learning and improving all the time.
Abs, what can coaches do to make their players feel listened to, valued and capable?
For me, I always like to allow my players to sort of know that I'm listening to them by engaging with them, player ownership, asking them for some input. I think it's really important that you want to make your players to feel like they're being listened to. I always like to let my players talk before the game, half time, they're the first ones talking, because it allows me to see if they're understanding what I'm communicating with them. Ultimately, they're on the pitch playing the game, so you want to see it from their eyes as well. I think that's really important.
And as well as sort of listening to what they say, it's also listening to what they're not saying, so picking up on signs, picking up on body language, but then having that conversation and giving them the floor, listening to what they said, but then responding appropriately. And then if there's action to be taken, it's not just a case of listening, then you may have to do something as a result of what you've heard or what's been said.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think sometimes we have to be cautious that some players might not have the confidence to maybe come and ask questions or raise any points of concern or want to ask why, you know, they're not in a squad or why are we doing this in training. So, you know, as we've said, we have your captains, your vice captains, but a leadership group, that's something we've implemented. So we've got a captain, a vice captain, and then 3 players who are in the leadership group. So those 5 kind of have little meetings, little catch-ups, and any player can go into them with any thoughts, concerns. I think having like a leadership group is a fantastic way to, you know, ensure that players understand they've still got their safe space and they still have got real opportunity to raise their thoughts and be heard, be listened to. And as you said, it's not just listening, it's actually doing something with it, making action, being proactive with it. And I think that also comes along with empathy. Like empathy of a coach is so important. So ensuring your players feel listened to, but then actually acting on what has been raised is so important.
I like the leadership group. We've introduced that, and we just had one of the players is a psychologist, and we had a little workshop about goal setting as well. Now the onus is on us to ensure that we maintain that. Yeah. We've said it, we've got to listen to the players and we've got to appreciate them. How can coaches use the power of play to motivate players?
Play is something that really has to be a self-choice. I think we all started by playing, didn't we, in the garden or in the streets or in the playground. And that was where we developed our love of the game. So providing that opportunity for players to experiment, to practice in an environment, again, where there's support, but where it's okay to go and try something, go and do something, go and, let's say, experiment. That's where creativity comes into play. And that's where you get a real sense of who that individual player is and what their style of play is.
I think we've all played at school like that kind of jumpers for goalposts. You know, lunchtime you put down your jumper or your school shoes, get your trainers on, and you know, I think it really varies. There might be 10 of you that are playing on a Tuesday lunchtime, but the next lunchtime there's 40 of you. So that real creativity in those moments. So going from when there's only 10 to then 40, how that picture changes. And we don't want players to lose that. We want them to still have that freedom, that creativity, that opportunity to not be so regimented. And I think that's why it's so important within training to still put on small-sided games. But those kind of 4v4s, 3v3s allow players to be really creative and probably bring the stuff they're doing at a lunchtime actually into a more probably consistent environment with actual training. And I think it's so important to ensure we don't lose that in players. I think we can be guilty of players having freedom, and then when they come into us, maybe as they're going through the ages, it becomes so structured and they probably lose that little bit of freedom that made them who they were, that real super strength of them. So I think it's so important they don't lose that, because I think if they lose that, they might slightly lose their motivation.
Yeah, I think it's ages and stages as well. So if you're working across, you know, from the foundation phase to the open sort of age group, but disabilities as well. So for me, power of play is that if you're I've worked with students with disabilities, and it's how you engage with them as well. So if they're continuously failing or what they see as failure, how can you adapt the play to engage them, keep them motivated and get success? And what does success look like as well?
What advice do you have to help coaches support players to develop their self-awareness and self-motivation when working in different areas of the game?
I think we've kind of spoken about that. Obviously, there's such a range of experiences in the game, playing experiences. You might be 14 but only have 1 year of playing, or you might be 8 but have 4 years of playing. So it's for us as coaches to understand really where they are on their journey. Obviously, most of my experiences are working in senior women's football. And we do sometimes have challenges because, you know, the girls are coming in, they'll have had a full work day, worked 8-9 hours, and then coming into us in the evening, they're exhausted, they will have had to make dinner, they might have kids. And for us to then get them motivated can sometimes be a little bit tough. So we've started now making warm-ups even just a little bit more fun, a little bit of head, shoulders, knees, toes, ball, all of that thing, bit of it stuck in the mud. Probably by putting them back on the playground, making it a little bit fun for them, and straight away you've got them hooked in. They're smiling, they're laughing, the enjoyment's there. And then obviously we can get going with maybe a little bit more technical, tactical based stuff, but that social, psychological element when they first step onto the pitch is important. If they don't have that or they're lacking that for that session, then the technical, tactical attributes will also be down. So for me now, it's hit them straight away with the social, psychological, fun activities. Rondos, love a rondo, really fun. It's a bit silly, but it keeps them engaged, loads of touches on the ball. And then the rest of the session, you've got them hooked. I think it's really, really important.
You look on our England Football Learning and you see Gareth Southgate when he was here doing head, shoulders, knees and toes, or cat and mouse. And, you know, I do that with under 8s all the way through. I did it the other day with a senior team, and one of the players turned around and said, "I love that." And, you know, that goes to show no matter how old you are, you can adapt a session to meet the needs of the players you're working with.
One thing I've tried and hopefully found works with players to develop their own self-awareness is journaling. So just keeping a record of in training or in games, how they felt at certain moments in the game, what their emotions were, why they were feeling like that, what it was that created that particular behaviour at that time, and how they responded to that, how they reacted to that. So they start to get a sense of really who they are. And for motivation, you mentioned earlier about setting targets, Abs. Yeah, having targets, having goals, something that they've got to work towards. And who's going to help them to achieve that? Who can they go to for support for that? So having that thought in the back of the mind every time they come to training, there's something there that they're working towards. And I think we see a lot now of coaches having ILPs for players, individual learning plans, and it's something that the players are working towards and really thrive on. So they'd be two things I would recommend for coaches.
That's self-awareness, isn't it? Because it's the players recognising within their ILPs, IDPs, across the four-corner model where they feel they need to develop, because they're the ones on the pitch that are playing the game. They get a real feel for it. And as I said, I think that comes with a bit of age and a bit of experience of the game. You know, within club, we were doing that foundation phase. We were doing IDPs for players, and it was fantastic seeing kind of where they were maybe at the start of the 6 weeks to where they ended up 6 weeks later. And it was because they had a real appreciation for what they needed to work on, and because they were there because they wanted to become professional footballers. And they just loved the game, they just wanted to develop, and they worked so hard to get there. So that was a real balance between that self-awareness of what they needed to develop, but the self-motivation then to actually go and actually do it and achieve it was really, really important.
Also, just to finish up, it's not just training days, match days as well, and being consistent across. So I set little challenges with my under 10s, 11s, is that challenge the sort of the wingers, how many crosses they might be able to get in or how many players they might be able to beat. And it might just be something fun, like winner gets a bag of Haribos or something, but you're setting a bit of friendly competition or challenge that is consistent with what you try to achieve in training, because you might be working on final third stuff. So yeah, definitely consistent over training and match day is a singular message as well.
Final question. Abs, to wrap up this discussion, what are your quick fire top tips to help coaches support their players to develop self-awareness and self-motivation?
Yeah, I think what we just said, I'll jump in and nick some of yours. Goal setting, also being consistent with language, making it personalised as well for the players. Yeah, I'd say those three would be my top tips.
For me, understand yourself first, so as the coach, and then listen to your players, understand your players, and then respond accordingly.
I think just on that, yeah, like recognise your own behaviours as a coach and how that will impact your players, and then that will obviously help support the players understand that how their behaviours impact not only themselves but their teammates around them as well.
And ultimately, I think it's the purpose and why as well, isn't it? For you as a coach, and why you're there to support your players and serve your players ultimately, isn't it?